We've decided to adopt, just as a loose theme for the course, a biological theme so that you can see the connections between chemistry and biology and the things you might consider doing in the future. We want you to think about the molecules that are relevant to your body, the processes that occur in your body, the chemistry that's going on, and how energy plays a role. And we've divided the course into 4 sections, and after each section there will be a midterm. The first one is about matter. So 2 decades later, what's changed? It's now widely recognized that just 20% of health outcomes are tied to medical care, whereas up to 70% are tied to healthy behaviors and what's called the social determinants of health. Basically, everything that happens to us for that vast majority of time when we're not in the doctor's office or the hospital. Healthcare executives now routinely remind us that our zip code matters more than our genetic code. And one healthcare publication even recently had the audacity to describe the social determinants of health as the feel-good buzzword of the year.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My theme for this session is Convergence, Technology Change and Business Practice. This is somewhat dear to my heart, in that I have spent much of the last 15 years involved in various aspects of technology and their impact on business, across a broad spectrum, from applications of signal processing in manufacture right through to the use of utilization data and diary applications, to improve the time utilization of the sales force.
What was interesting and revealing about younger and middle-aged views on old age was how relative these were to the individual's own age. Those in their teens regarded 40 as old, whereas those in their 40s thought 70 or 80 was old. For many, health was seen as a determining factor in deciding who is old, and many young participants commented on how fit and active their grandparents are, while others thought ill health and dependence were an inevitable part of aging. The majority of participants, however, regarded old age as something negative, and many expressed fear of growing old.
Lead-in time is the amount of time that elapses between a business placing an order with a supplier for more stock or raw materials and the delivery of the goods to the business. Businesses want the lead time to be as short as possible, so that they can meet their customer orders and minimize the time between paying for the stock and receiving the feedback from the customer. However, this may not happen due to a number of factors, such as delays in the supplier receiving the order, or the breakdown of the supplier's lorries delivering the stock to the business. The earlier chocolate was quite unpalatable. They used to add things to it to make it more palatable, so for the early chocolate, they didn't know how to extract all the cocoa fat from it, so it was, or could be quite greasy, and if you made it as a drink you'd have this sort of scum on the top. So they used to try and add things to it, like starch and things, to make it a more palatable product. So there were a lot of scandals around the kind of things they were adding to chocolate in the 19th century. So by the sort of 1870s, 1880s, there are people like Cadbury's saying, our chocolate is absolutely pure. We have this new process, the Van Houten process, which now extracts all this horrible fat that we can use to make eating chocolate. Now we have a pure product. So, palm oil is the most widely produced oil crop currently. It's used in a wide range of industries, including food for biofuels and in soaps and shampoo. However, though sector's growing fast, and unfortunately palm oil grows in exactly the same environment as tropical rainforest. So, the use and the development of palm oil, the growth in the sector, is leading to wide-scale deforestation. What we are hoping to do is, if we can come up an alternative, we can slow the growth of the sector and therefore stop the wide-scale deforestation in South Asia. As with all human behavior, there are numerous reasons for it. But often it's caused by someone who feels the need to show their superiority over someone else, in order to feel that they aren't at the lowest level in hierarchy or a group of people. In some cases, one person simply dislikes the other, on the basis that the personality of one is in some way incompatible with that of the other person. We've decided to adopt, just as a loose theme for the course, a biological theme so that you can see the connections between chemistry and biology and the things you might consider doing in the future. We want you to think about the molecules that are relevant to your body, the processes that occur in your body, the chemistry that's going on, and how energy plays a role. And we've divided the course into 4 sections, and after each section there will be a midterm. The first one is about matter. One seminal difference in policy remains: the coalition has not matched what is Labour's most important innovation promise. That is to bring together responsibilities for innovation, industry, science and research under one single federal minister. Innovation responsibilities currently lie within the powerful Department of Education and Science, and while there is a separate industry department, it has little influence within cabinet. This has hampered policy development and given Australia's innovation policies a distinct science and research bias. It is the scientists rather than the engineers who call the tune in innovation policy in Canberra, so it's no surprise our policies are all about boosting government-funded research and later commercializing their results. Life in the UK 2012 provides a unique overview of well-being in the UK today. The report is the first snapshot of life in the UK to be delivered by the Measuring National Wellbeing Programme and will be updated and published annually. Well-being is discussed in terms of the economy, people and the environment. Information such as the unemployment rate or number of crimes against the person are presented alongside data on people's thoughts and feelings, for example, satisfaction with our jobs or leisure time and fear of crime. Together, a richer picture on how society is doing is provided. You might picture Neanderthals as cavemen gnawing on bones around a campfire. Which wouldn't be inaccurate, but Neanderthals may have also dined on roasted vegetables and known a bit about medicinal plants too. So says a study in the journal Naturwissenschaften, The Science of Nature. Researchers analyzed hardened dental plaque from 5 Neanderthals found in El Cedrón cave in northern Spain. Yes, 50,000-year-old dental plaque. And they found a lot lurking between the teeth. Like evidence of nuts, grasses and green veggies, chemical traces of wood smoke, and tiny, intact starch granules, proof Neanderthals ate their carbs. And in one individual, they detected compounds found in the medicinal herbs chamomile and yarrow. The herbs have no nutritional value, and since Neanderthals did have the gene to detect the herbs' bitter taste, the researchers speculate that the cave dwellers were munching on them not as food, but to self-medicate. Not too far-fetched, they say, because primates like chimps also use medicinal plants. Luckily for the scientists doing this detective work, Neanderthals may have known a thing or two about medicine, but they didn't get regular checkups at the dentist. UNICEF is warning that schools in Haiti are increasingly at the mercy of gangs, with children becoming targets of robbery or ransom. The agency said Tuesday at least 7 schools in the capital of Port-au-Prince have been forced to pay unidentified gangs in exchange for security in the past 2 months and that additional institutions have also been threatened. The warning comes days after authorities said gang members killed a university professor they had recently abducted. In addition, U.S. and Haitian authorities are still trying to secure the release of 17 missionaries from a U.S. religious organization who were kidnapped on October 16 near the capital. A massive tow truck worked Saturday to remove the remains of a burned-out oil tanker that exploded in a giant fireball overnight near the capital of Sierra Leone. Reuters' David Doyle has more. Deputy Health Minister Amara Jambai said the death toll currently stands at 99 with more than 100 people being treated in hospitals and clinics across the capital, Freetown. In a video from the scene shared online, the head of the National Disaster Management Agency, Brima Buresise, said, "We've got so many casualties, burned corpses," adding, "It's a terrible, terrible accident." Freetown's mayor said the extent of the damage from Friday's explosion was not yet known, adding that police and her deputy were at the scene to assist disaster management officials. At least 5 people were killed and several others wounded when Sudanese security forces opened fire on demonstrators in Khartoum and elsewhere in the country Saturday. The Sudan Doctors Committee said 4 people died from gunshots and 1 suffocated from tear gas in Khartoum and Omdurman on Saturday. Several other protesters were wounded, including from gunshots. The rallies came 2 days after military coup leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan reappointed himself the head of the Sovereign Council, Sudan's interim governing body. Thursday's move angered the pro-democracy alliance and frustrated the United States and other countries that have urged the military to reverse its coup and to restore civilian rule. President Trump has warned Turkey's President Erdogan that foreign interference is complicating the situation in Libya. It comes after Turkey MPs approved a bill, allowing the military to be deployed to interfere in Libya's civil war in support of the UN-backed government in Tripoli. The United States is to ban a number of popular e-cigarette flavors to curb the rising use of vaping products among teenagers. However, menthol and tobacco flavors will be allowed to remain on the market and large refillable vaping devices are completely exempt from the ban. First it was pets, then fish. Now it's poultry and pigs. The list of animals allowed to feed on insects is growing. A new EU law authorizing the use of insect protein in poultry and pig feed came into force earlier this month, a significant milestone for an industry keen to worm its way into the animal feed business. Since a ban on processed animal protein was imposed in 2001 in the wake of the mad cow crisis, soy and fish meal have become the bedrock of animal feed in Europe. It was another roller coaster week for energy prices. After OPEC and its allies resisted calls to increase output, the price of Brent crude surpassed $0 per barrel and reached its highest level in 3 years. The cartel said it would stick to the gradual increases in output it agreed to over the summer. The energy shortage rattled other financial markets too, as investors worried about the fallout. In America and Europe, government bond yields climbed. In Britain, the yield on 10-year gilts jumped to its highest since May 2019. A hormone called relaxin helps loosen up pregnant women's hips. Without it, the pain of delivery would be unbearable. Its job done, however, relaxing lingers in female bodies for up to a year, when softer ligaments make new mothers more prone to injury, as Jessica Ennis-Hill, an Olympic champion heptathlete, discovered in training after giving birth in 2014. 5 years later, Dame Jessica started Jennies, a fitness app to help other women perform safe post-natal workouts. It now lets users optimize workouts for the different phases of their menstrual cycles, and has just concluded a successful funding round.
On the face of things, it seems both absurd and unfair that large American companies regularly whittle down their tax bills, taking advantage of every loophole on offer. One study found that at least 55 big companies incurred no federal taxes at all on their profits in 2020. A proposal being discussed as The Economist went to press, and as the Democratic Party scrambled to fund its social spending package, seems to offer a popular solution: a minimum tax on corporate earnings as reported to shareholders, rather than as massaged down when reported to tax collectors.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo will hold an election in December, hopefully leading to a peaceful democratic transfer of power for the first time in the country's history. Sitting President Joseph Kabila came to power in 2001, having succeeded his father, Laurent Desire Kabila, after his assassination. Joseph Kabila was elected as president in 2006 for a 5-year term, and re-elected in 2011. Though his second term ended in 2016 and the DRC constitution prevents him from seeking a third term, elections were not held and Kabila remained in power.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the first part of its latest assessment report. The Earth is warming. Even with a drastic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, temperatures will probably be 1.5 degrees Celsius above their late 19th century levels by 2050. Climate change is underway, the report laments, with all the environmental consequences that brings. The extent of the damage depends on the cumulative buildup of emissions and can be limited if the world strives for net zero carbon emissions.
It might sound obvious that if you want to improve a robot's software, you should improve its software. Agrim Gupta of Stanford University, however, begs to differ. He thinks you can also improve a robot's software by improving its hardware. That is, by letting the hardware adapt itself to the software's capabilities. As they describe in Nature Communications, he and his colleagues have devised a way of testing this idea. In doing so, they have brought to robotics the principles of evolution by natural selection. They've also cast the spotlight on an evolutionary idea that dates from the 1890s, but which has hitherto proved hard to demonstrate.
European market is a tough terrain for food delivery firms.
Delivery Hero has had a good run in the past couple of years. In August 2020, it ascended to the DAX, the stock market index of Germany's most valuable listed firms. It is present in 50 countries on 4 continents. Revenue for the third quarter was €1.8 billion, that's $2 billion, a jump of 89% compared with the same period in 2020. We grew 100% before Corona, 100% during Corona, and we will grow 100% after Corona, says Niklas Ostberg, the Berlin-based firm's Swedish chief executive. By numbers of orders, Delivery Hero is more than twice as big as DoorDash, its large American rival.
The lives of distinguished people often take a lot of telling, yet even devotees might raise an eyebrow at the heft of Sir Paul McCartney's memoir, 2 volumes totalling 960 pages. Casual Beatles fans may be surprised by the title too, though most would consider Sir Paul the band's best musician, with an honourable mention for George Harrison. John Lennon typically gets the plaudits for writing. In a poll by the BBC in 2001 to rank the greatest lyricists, Lennon received more than twice as many votes as McCartney.
Like every farmer, Courtney Hammond, who grows blueberries and cranberries in Washington County, Maine, has a lot of worries. He frets about weather, invasive species, failed crops, and global prices. To abide by federal food safety laws, he has had to do training, maintain meticulous records, have insect and rodent control plans, and document daily the sanitation of his processing equipment. It is a tremendous amount of work, but it means, he says, I don't have to worry about anybody getting sick from eating anything that leaves my farm. Now he is worried that a new law may put his hard work in jeopardy. Earlier this month, 61% of voters opted to change the state constitution to ensure that all Mainers had a right to food, first law of its kind in America.
On August 4th, explosives aboard 2 drones flying near Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro as he spoke in Caracas were detonated. 7 people were injured. Maduro has used the incident as a pretext to crack down on Venezuela's opposition by unleashing the regime's secret police. State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert said the United States condemns the political violence that occurred on August 4th and urges the Maduro regime to respect the rule of law, exercise restraint, and safeguard the presumption of innocence for all accused.
Even if the distribution of women's occupations matched that of men, if women were the doctors and men were the nurses, she calculates that at most 1/3 of the pay gap would disappear. The most important cause is that women curtail their careers as a part of a rational household response to labour markets, which generously reward anyone, male or female, who is willing to hold down what Ms. Goldin calls a greedy job. These are roles such as those in law, accountancy and finance that demand long and unpredictable hours. Parents need somebody to be on call at home in case a child falls ill and needs picking up from school, or needs cheering on at a concert or football match.
High staff churn is here to stay. Retention strategies require a rethink.
In the not-so-distant past, bosses did not have to worry as much about their workforces. Newcomers could absorb the corporate culture osmotically. Workers' families were invisible, not constantly interrupting Zoom calls. Employees had a job, not a voice. Now firms have to be intentional. Management speak for thinking about everything from the point of the office to how staff communicate with each other. Retention is the latest area to require attention. The spike in staff departures, known as the Great Resignation, is centred on America. A record 3% of the workforce there quit their jobs in September.
In 1945, while in a state of exhaustion, the mathematician John von Neumann had a kind of stammering premonition. He was in Los Alamos working on the atom bomb, and he told his wife, Clary, that the energy source he was helping to develop would make scientists the most hated and also the most wanted citizens of any country. Then he informed her that his other ongoing project, the computer, would one day be even more important and potentially even more dangerous. Good biographies of some of the greatest mathematical minds are rare. Because they were polymaths, biographers who can interpret their manifold achievements for the ordinary mortal are themselves thin on the ground. This has been von Neumann's fate, and the upshot is that he has not had the recognition he deserves.
President Trump has reluctantly signed into law a congressional bill imposing sanctions on Russia over its policy in Ukraine and alleged meddling in last year's US presidential election. Afterwards, he called the legislation seriously flawed, saying it encroached on his powers to negotiate foreign policy and hurt the interests of European allies. The company that provided the Venezuelan voting system for the controversial Constituent Assembly elections says the turnout figure was inflated by at least 1 million. The Speaker of the opposition-controlled National Assembly called on prosecutors to open a criminal investigation immediately.
The United States has confirmed that it will pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Washington has informed the United Nations, formally implementing a decision by President Trump in June. But the State Department said the US would continue to participate in climate change meetings until the withdrawal process was completed. New research indicates that weather-related disasters could kill more than 150,000 people in Europe each year by the end of the century. The European Commission report estimated that heat waves would cause 99% of all weather-related deaths on the continent.
The Venezuelan authorities say they have suppressed what they termed a terrorist attack on an army base in the city of Valencia. Diosdado Cabello of the governing United Socialist Party said loyal troops re-established security at the base. Officials said 7 people had been arrested and at least one of them died. Afghan officials say at least 50 people, including women and children, have been killed by militants in the northern province of Saripul. A spokesman told the BBC that insurgents attacked security checkpoints and entered a village, killing civilians, among them women and children. He said Taliban and Islamic State fighters were involved. The Taliban has denied killing civilians. They say they killed 28 members of a local militia.
Executive Vice President of the U.S. government's Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or OPIC, David Bohigian, and other U.S. government officials traveled to Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia in August to promote U.S. investment in those countries. OPIC is the U.S. government's development finance institution. It mobilizes private capital to help address critical development challenges and, in doing so, advances U.S. foreign policy and national security priorities. On August 14th, the U.S. delegation met with Armenian Minister of Economic Development and Investments, Artsvik Minayasin.
Within the past few minutes, the Election Commission in Kenya has declared that Tuesday's presidential election was won by the incumbent Uhuru Kenyatta. The opposition, which has complained of fraud, has rejected the result. An opposition spokesman described the process as a masquerade. World leaders have expressed concern at the war of words between Washington and Pyongyang over North Korea's nuclear program. After President Trump said the US military was locked and loaded, North Korea accused him of driving the situation to the brink of nuclear war. Russia, China and Germany have all appealed for calm and further diplomatic efforts.
First, though, the U.S. government has released its monthly jobs report. It's one measure of how the economy as a whole is doing. The report that just came out is for the month of September, and it was a disappointment. Economists had expected that 479,000 jobs would have been added last month. The actual number was well below half that, according to the U.S. Labor Department. It was the second month in a row that the number of jobs added to the American economy was dramatically lower than what economists predicted, and no one knows exactly why the growth in this area has slowed down. Many economists point to continued concerns about the coronavirus pandemic and the Delta variant of the disease. Even though they usually start to decrease this time of year, the average price for a gallon of gasoline in the United States hit $3.27 this week. That's its highest price in 7 years, and it's almost double what it was last spring when roads and runways were nearly empty because of the COVID pandemic. There are several components to the price of gasoline: the cost of getting it to gas stations, federal and state taxes, the costs of refining it, the profits gas companies make. They all factor in. But the biggest chunk of what we pay, accounting for 43% of the cost of gasoline, is the price of the crude oil gas is made from. And not coincidentally, crude is also at its highest price in 7 years at just over $80 per barrel.
The enduring defeat of ISIS remains a top priority for the United States. The U.S.-led global coalition to defeat ISIS is leading stabilization efforts that consolidate military gains, restore basic essential services, and enable Syrians to voluntarily and safely return to their homes in Raqqa and other former ISIS strongholds. Assistance includes explosive hazard and rubble removal, providing clean water, rehabilitating electricity networks, and other basic necessities. Since April, the United States has elicited approximately $300 million in contributions and pledges from coalition partners to support immediate stabilization and early recovery initiatives in areas liberated from ISIS in northeast Syria.
The U.S. government says it's made progress in an effort to relieve some of the shipping problems that have clogged up the international supply chain. The government does not control that chain. It's largely made up of private port operators, trucking companies, railroads and warehouses, but the Biden administration is putting its support behind a plan for the Port of Los Angeles to operate 24/7 and for large companies like Walmart, Home Depot and UPS to ship more goods at night. California's Port of Los Angeles is one of the most congested ports on Earth. 40% of all the containers shipped to America come through here and at the Port of Long Beach. Economic analysts and trade leaders say this is a step in the right direction, but that it won't make a major impact in supply problems.
First though, family members, politicians, historians and civil rights advocates are paying tribute to Colin Powell, an American military and political leader who passed away Monday at age 84. Powell had an extraordinary resume dating all the way back to his work in the Reserve Officers Training Corps while he was in college. At that time, Powell had attained the ROTC's highest rank and he continued to advance his military career from there. Powell served in combat during the Vietnam War and became a four-star general in the U.S. Army. During the presidency of Ronald Reagan, Powell became America's first black national security advisor. Under President George H. W. Bush, Powell became the first African American chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, the country's highest-ranking military officer.
Two former U.S. Republican presidents, George Bush Sr. and his son, George W., have called on Americans to reject racism and antisemitism. It's being seen as a rebuke to Donald Trump for his comments about who was responsible for clashes in Charlottesville on Saturday. Mr. Trump sparked fury when he again blamed both anti-racist protesters and white supremacists. One demonstrator, Heather Heyer, was killed. At her memorial service, her mother said the killer had wanted to silence her daughter, but had ended up magnifying her. President Trump has announced he's dismantling two advisory panels made mainly of senior business figures. Several resigned in the controversy over the U.S. leader's reaction to events in Charlottesville.
The authorities in the Spanish city of Barcelona say 13 people have been killed and 80 injured by a van, which deliberately drove into them at a popular tourist market. The vehicle moved at speed through Las Ramblas in the city centre, before being abandoned by the driver who ran away. Hundreds of tourists and local people took shelter in shops and churches, as police searched for suspects. Hours later, 2 of them, including a man of Moroccan origin, were arrested. Spanish media say another suspect was killed in a police shootout on the outskirts of the city. The Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, who is on his way to Barcelona, says he will be coordinating efforts to reinforce security, while the Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, has called for solidarity.
The government of the Spanish region of Catalonia has contradicted an assertion by the central authorities in Madrid that the jihadist cell behind twin attacks in Catalonia had been dismantled. The Interior Minister in the Catalan regional government, Joaquim Forn, said Catalan police were heading the inquiry and detectives were still searching for at least one suspect. At Turkey's request, the Spanish authorities have arrested the German-Turkish writer Doğan Akanlı. Mr. Akanlı, who's written extensively on Turkey's human rights record, is a critic of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It's not known on what grounds Turkey issued the international arrest warrant.
Spanish police say they have identified the driver of the van that mowed down crowds walking along Barcelona's main tourist street last Thursday, killing 13 people. They haven't named him, but he's understood to be Younes Abouyaaquoub, a 22-year-old born in Morocco. Police say he may have fled the country. A South African court has given permission for an online auction of rhino horns despite a global trade ban. The authorities have tried to stop the 3-day auction. There's a great demand for rhino horns in Vietnam and China with their use in traditional medicines. The South African government has confirmed that it granted diplomatic immunity to Zimbabwe's First Lady, Grace Mugabe, enabling her to return home despite being accused of assaulting a model in Johannesburg. The government said it was imperative to maintain good relations with Zimbabwe.
The U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, recently announced additional assistance to support achieving the goals outlined in the bilateral Development Objectives Assistance Agreement between the U.S. and Nigerian governments signed in 2015. $25 million will strengthen good governance by supporting state governments' efforts to bolster Nigeria's open government partnership commitments to improve transparency and fight corruption. An additional $1.5 million will support a healthier, more educated population in targeted states through the U.S. President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, also known as PEPFAR, for a total of $26.5 million in additional assistance.
The United States and South Korea announced late Saturday the two countries will end annual large-scale joint military exercises as part of diplomatic efforts to achieve complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. In a statement, the Pentagon said Acting Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan and South Korea's Minister of National Defense, in a phone call Saturday, decided to end the Key Resolve and Full Eagle series of exercises. The decision comes 3 days after a summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Vietnam that ended without an agreement to resolve the North Korean nuclear crisis. Seoul's defense ministry released a similar statement, according to the Associated Press.
In an effort to encourage the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or North Korea, to dismantle its nuclear weapons program, the United Nations Security Council last year passed Resolution 2375, which imposes sanctions on North Korea. The United States is determined to strictly implement this resolution. Members of the UN Security Council, and by extension all UN member states, have unanimously agreed to fully enforce sanctions on North Korea, and we expect them to continue to honor those commitments, said Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
China is stepping up its efforts, announcing a long-awaited plan to link up its southern Pearl River Delta into a massive hub of technology, research, finance, and innovation. The possibilities and challenges of the project are both equally challenging and promising, according to analysts. Some describe the plan as an attempt to create a megacity to rival Silicon Valley, the U.S. technology powerhouse that is home to companies such as Google, Facebook, and Apple. But while Silicon Valley has a population of 3.1 million, the Greater Bay Area will link up 9 cities together with Hong Kong and Macau, with a total population of about 70 million, and the economic heft, state media argues, to drive the Chinese economy, let alone the world.
Heavy rains are expected to fall in a few weeks. Aid agencies are racing to shore up flimsy shelters and stabilize shaky terrain before the monsoon season begins. The UN Refugee Agency says the work ahead is monumental, but preparations are off to a better start this year than last. Aid agencies last year had to deal with a massive influx of more than 740,000 Rohingya refugees fleeing violence and persecution in Myanmar. They arrived over a period of a few months, straining local resources and requiring vast amounts of humanitarian assistance.